Hi, everyone. This is Phyllis Klein, and I'm here with Nan Meneely and Anne Harding Woodworth, and this is Poets in Conversation. And tonight's reading is steeped in New England and the Mid-Atlantic region of Washington, D.C. These authors are very interested in their roots and histories, and we'll be hearing about persona poems, people the poets are interested in getting to know by writing poetry in their voices. This is also an evening about connectedness and parallel processes in life and poetry. Anne and Nan, long-term friends, find any subject is okay to write about, whether it be trouble or joy. And above all, these poets want us to relax and enjoy. And I'm certainly ready for that. The three of us spent some time, we had a lovely time before on Zoom together, getting to know each other and talking about how we were going to structure the reading and what we were going to talk about. And, you know, we all feel very strongly that we want to spend some time thinking about the war and honoring the people of Ukraine. So I decided I would read my poem called Refugee Heart as a way of getting us started. Refugee Heart. 1. Your refugee heart waits, displaced heart squeezed into a suitcase, hides under the mattress. Your exiled hands fold, anticipate the moment of escape, salvation to show up down the road. Your foreign feet take you in that direction, carry away your refugee heart, your exiled hands, your immigrant eyes, looking for anything familiar on the way to the new place. The fields you walk ruined. Your wanderer's legs, your castaway chest. It's quiet enough to hear your breath, your footsteps, the red cacophony of confusion and fear. Now the smack and smash of hate approaching, the smell of dirt, your desperate mouth forming no, your scramble to safety, the abandoned shack, your arms hanging like broken hands in a broken clock, your lips, waiting for words to come. The chambered love in your refugee heart holds its beats, a conductor waiting for time to begin again. 2. Poor refugee heart, surrounded by thorns, forgets how to love. Contortionist heart tries to find its way out of the rhetoric of hate, dodge the hurtling word bullets, the gray war machines. Pacifist heart, how did you get in range of these weapons, this mass destruction? Cracked heart, backlit, fleeing, borders shut, no man's land. Somewhere a place, somewhere a bed, a meal. Hungry heart, refuge near an ocean, open sky, refugee heart in red, second hand still sweeping. And, you know, I wrote this a number of years ago, so it's really shocking to me how things have stayed the same or gotten worse. Okay, well, now I'm going to introduce both Anne and Nan. So I'll start with Anne Harding Woodworth. Her most recent book, Trouble, received the 2022 William Meredith Award for Poetry in January. Among Anne's many persona poems, Hannah Alive was adapted to a one-woman show and was a finalist in the Adirondack Shakespeare Festival. Anne is no stranger to the novella in verse. Spare Parts appeared in 2008, and her eighth book of poetry, Gender, with 2 novellas in verse, will appear later this year. In both novellas, gender plays the star role. Anne is a member of the poetry board at the Folger Shakespeare Library and the board of governors at the Emily Dickinson Museum. She and her husband, Fred, live in Washington, D.C., and every now and then go to a cabin in the mountains of Western North Carolina, where Anne, a bugler, plays taps to the forest at sundown. I love that. As the mother of 2 former professional soccer players, Greg and Alexi Lalas, Anne has been known to write soccer poems. She is the founding chair of the DC Scores, an after-school program for children that includes soccer and writing poetry. She edited the anthology Soccer Zones, Writings Out of American Soccer, and every 4 years since 1994, she has written a World Cup poem. 2022 will be the year for another. And I have to say, I thought about taking some of this out to make it a little shorter, and the same with Nan's, but it's just too interesting. So I felt I had to read it all. A bugler. Okay. And now I have Nancy Fitz-Hugh Meneely. After 35 years away, she returned to Connecticut to pursue what Barton Wormser calls the poetry life. She thrives by her association with both the Guilford Poets Guild and the Connecticut River Poets. She also founded an ongoing summer poetry retreat for Frost Programs alums. She has taught at high school, college, and graduate levels and managed federal and state training programs. Her first book, Letter from Italy, in 1994, which was published by Antrim House, was noted by the Hartford Courant as one of the 13 important books published by Connecticut writers in 2013. It provided the libretto for an oratorio composed by her sister, Sarah Meneely Kiter. Now that's pretty amazing too. Her second book, Simple Absence, also Antrim House, was nominated for the National Book Award and placed as a grand prize finalist for the 2021 Next Generation Indie Awards and the 2021 Eric Hoffer Award. She insists that in the absence of being able to fly, the best way in the world to move is to body surf the perfect wave. Let it pour you forward too fast through spume and deposit you on the sand the water has scoured to velvet. And I just have to say, there's so much connection in these bios. And then I wanted to add that that Nan and I found out that if you go to where the Hoffer Book Awards are, our little blurbs for the award are just almost right one after the other. So there's a lot of synchronicity and connection going on here. So, so I think I'm going to now hand everything over to Anne and Nan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phyllis. And that we're going to return to your beautiful refugee poem in a minute. But we first just want to say that we are so pleased, both Nan and I, to be here. We have been friends for a very long time, ever since we were freshmen at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And we've had pretty parallel lives. At Smith, we sang in an octet together. We even sang for our supper at one of the fancy local restaurants in Northampton. And we sang at Carnegie Hall with the octet. And we've also both continued to love choral music in one way or another for the rest of our lives. We've each had more than one marriage. Sorry, Nan, shouldn't I have said that? And in the early 90s, my husband and I moved to Washington, D.C. area where Nan and her family were living. And we then began to share our love of poetry for many, many years. And even when Nan moved to Connecticut, where she lives now, we continue this sharing our poetry. Nan and I are going to read poems that have parallel themes. But first, I'd like to recognize the fact that today, March 26th, is the day that Walt Whitman died in 1892, 130 years ago today. So I thought I'd read my little poem from my book Trouble called Whitman's Last Words. On his deathbed, Walt Whitman, he had suffered a paralytic stroke, and he could barely move. And he had a nurse and a friend named Warren Fritzinger, whom he called Worry. And he said his last words to Worry, that the last words he ever spoke were, "Shift, Worry," because he wanted to be turned. He couldn't move enough to turn his own body. This is called Whitman's Last Words. Worry, shift. From bed, he was asking something of Warren, his nurse, asking his nurse to turn him over. Maybe he said, "Adjust me, Worry. Change things for me. I'm not comfortable. Not yet, not now." And then he said, "Worry, shift. It's no good this way. Worry, shift, shift, Worry. My weight, I feel it. It wants to move, alter its lie. I feel my weight. I don't feel my weight. Get me ready, Worry. Shift, Worry." Well, Phyllis, your beautiful refugee poem, like all the poems in Full Moon Herald, gorgeous book, perfectly represents how you write about fear, hatred. I mean, that, what was it? The smack and smash of hate, great line. And hope. Your book is a mixture of understanding of the human condition and the craft of poetry that can expose that. Nan and I also have refugee poems, which we'd like to read now to complement yours. Nan's is about refugees fleeing, and mine is about refugees returning. So go ahead, Nan.
Departure, Libya. 1. Farewell to the village. My daughter is of desert formed, a child of endless sand. She wouldn't choose a smaller view, the contours of a different land. She'll miss the slowing summer stream, the slightest shade of stunted trees, the village strung along the path, the hours we shared, our ease in huts we built of daub and thatch, our floor the rumpled ground, the precious light that slipped inside, the singing, frothing sound of winds that scoured the towering dunes and swept the yard where dinner stewed. She'll miss our gathering out there while shadows blued. I too will miss the wind-carved sand, but though the constant faithful sun remains to us, the hopes for peace are prayers that perish one by one. The village burns. I turn in flight to memorize what we will leave, a life we've only now to grieve. I lift her quickly to my hip and cover both her eyes. She mustn't see her life on fire, the village as it dies. too journey to the shore. We hasten north with nothing else than others whom we love, rice and raisins in a pouch, our thickest clay pot for a stove. Our people say we mustn't stop for rest or sympathy until we reach the wooden boat that rides an unimagined sea. We borrow others' trembling faith, followed dumb, bereft, still deep in our abandoning what's left of what we've left. Our daughter is the all to us. We dare the water's mystery. Thank you.
When Refugees Come Home, with an epigraph by Wallace Stevens, the tea is bad, the bread sad. Wearing faded scarves, they come back on foot to a shortened roof and black burned lath, tiles shattered, floorboards that don't hold up the walking, shutters swinging, doors flattened, splintered, curled out into every yard, chickenless and unplayed. Soon, tea of unnamed leaves brews on outdoor fires. The rote of kneading dough returns, and bread bakes once again in open ovens, swept of cans, plastic caps, and brown thistle. A tree fruits for the homecoming, in spite of what it has seen or lent its branches for. A rope sways still.
The next category of poems, which Anne and I will read, one each, is called Pain and Mental Anguish. And I have known and grieved for people who've been hospitalized with severe mental illness, and each of our poems concerns one of those in our lives. This poem is called Diminution, and in high school, my best childhood friend developed what we know now to be severe anorexia. After college, she lived for a year in a psychiatric hospital. This poem will explain why. Diminution. My friend began to disappear in our junior year, melting at every softness to thinly covered curve of bone. Our teachers frowned as she lost her way, and she gazed back at them through a strange translucency. In her greenstone house on its acres of shadowed fields with creek and setters and ruminant cows, her room lay out toward silence, almost enclosed by the darkened breath of the hills. Together there, we could have spoken of everything, but the words she offered were empty of her. Whatever consumed her was sucking away at truth. Years later, persuaded again to eat and institutional shadows fading beneath her eyes, she told me, "He came to my bed the nights when you weren't there." I wished for her that every time he'd pushed me back from the front porch door and kissed me, his tongue a creature probing the wall of my teeth, furtively moving along my gums, I wish I had let the fury fork from my mouth, watched his face turn brittle and break, his lips fly loose as they tried to recapture the unsexed tongue. But I only watched as she tried to journey back to where she was no more than a gleam in her father's eye.
I'm going to read from a set of poems called the Sig poems. Sig was a young man who went to high school with my husband. And in his first year of college, I believe it was, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he used to write letters to my husband, from which I gleaned some of these lines. I'm just going to read two short ones from the cycle. Sig's cars. Police cars sentenced me to damnation in Colorado. Police gun cars threw me into the hospital. 2 cops tore my arms out across the front of a police car and broke both my shoulders, downstream, and no shoes. Corporations work through police cars. Time magazine hunts cars. Time advertises what they will hunt. Many days they followed my car. I was 5 cars stolen. I have no car. I walked to serious leg and eye consequences. They hunted me all around Oakland, California. Department radios posted everywhere. That's him. From the speed of cars and telephones, I know there's something beyond us. Sig's injuries. The story of my beatings by police is thin and bandaged. I was no names. I was no names. At school, we were good times. Touch football, squadron, good sport. I was no names. Now my head is kicked in. I won't ski again. Terrible end to a literary beginning at school. I went home to mother, in a house, in a room, in a shelter, with contusions, injuries, thin and bandaged, head kicked in. Good sport. I was no names. Both Nan and I have a grandparent poem. Mine is about my great-grandmother, Ella, who suffered from what was then called a nervous breakdown, I guess. And she would often go off to what was called a rest home. She was the mother of 3 child musicians, a pianist, that was my grandmother, a cellist, and a violinist. And these girls helped support the family with their music. Let's see. This is called Ella at the Turn of the Century. Agnes is the cellist, Bess the violinist, Kate the pianist, the teenage trio forged out of Mother Ella's mania. She abandons them at times, to keeping house alone, to practicing alone, to putting up their posters in upstate farm villages. The Bundy sisters play granges and auditoriums while the century hollows out. Audiot, the people say, terror on their tongues, and Ella quivers in a rest home. The fear of a new era tastes yellow. The girls draw close, angle their heads like sparrows to listen one to the others. Over their cadences, they can almost hear their mother's songs, her trills, her womanly treble, as she flees naked into a neighbor's field, and visions of ascent into heaven on the right hand of God in 1901.
My grandmother had 13 grandchildren who were dropped at her doorstep for various weeks of the summer. I need to note that the peacock in this poem is not fantastical. She really did have a peacock among her smaller fowl. The title of the poem is Still Life with Grandmother. Drugged with southern evening, we fight the need to go to bed, squabble over hearts until the youngest cousins cry. Enough, enough, she scolds and sends us up the stairs. We turn at the landing to see if she will come, but she has bent to her night work under the lamp, remote inside the wingback chair. Her shadowed face is stern. We leave her to the stillness she inhabits at night since grandfather sickened and died. The peacock has descended from the ridgepole. Furled and unremarkable, he drowses near the coop where the chickens fret and mumble in their sleep. Smells of boxwood, honeysuckle, last year's leaves becoming dirt, sieve in through window screens, and dark contracts around the house. She sits in her circle of light, crochet needle flashing in her tumbler hands, growing one more bedspread. She'll cover us all before she goes. Upstairs, we're sleeping greedily, storing ourselves for another August day. But she is only a passenger in these hours, carried with neither joy nor regret toward the shortened rest of the old and summer's long evaporation into fall. Thank you. The next category is, as Phyllis mentioned, persona poems. These ask the poet to write in a voice other than her own or his own. Mine is from a person unknown, who is, however, the wife of the astronomer who discovered Jupiter's 14th moon. In the 70s, I heard a radio announcement that because this astronomer had discovered this moon, he got to name her. And always these moons were named, given female names. And I wondered what it would be like to be the wife of someone in love with a moon. So this is called From the Wife of the Astronomer Who Discovered Jupiter's 14th Moon. Something luminous and secretive waits in the nighttime sky. My husband, covert in a spiral of star, finds her with his prurient lens. He will name her now, and so she will be his. To me, he brings cold hands down from the cyclopean attic. They're trembling as he comes into our bed, but he is only here to sleep. The rest, he has a loft. Discovery of fold and fissure, mound and dimple, pleasure that betrays his diffidence. He will not know the way I fear the sky, violent with randomness and full of frigid light, the way I feel about the moon, who draws him to the hope of heat around her radiance, and then beds cold in dawn's pale sky, morning's concubine.
I'm going to read a short section from my long poem called Hannah Alive. Hannah is her name is Hannah Hyatt O'Reilly, or H2O, and she loves water. She swims a lot. That's her big sport. She's in her 80s. She is a widow. She is an artist, a sculptor, and she thinks a lot about death, even thinks about suicide. And but the one I'm going to read is not about it's about death. It's about the Rosenbergs, who were the spies convicted in 1953 and sentenced to the electric chair. The Rosenbergs' death has stayed with me. It's grown with me. I was a teenager when it happened. The chair they ended up in, one after the other, was square and woody, almost mission style like some we used to have. Oak, but theirs was strewn with wires that zapped the body. The electric chair and the Rosenbergs in it made me think about death, and my fingers tingled with fear. But back then I had nowhere to turn. It was as if everyone around me wanted that couple to die. They had 2 boys, Robert, Michael. I saw pictures of them in magazines and made them my brothers. I thought I could stop the execution of our parents. Kids feel responsible when parents go wrong. A whole country let those parents sizzle. A whole country lets others sizzle still, but more quietly now. And isn't it an irony? On a hospital gurney. Up to the night the Rosenbergs died, I understood nothing of electricity, animal or human. Sure, I loved toast with butter and sourwood honey. I loved my clock radio and your hit parade. But that night at 13, I learned how quick, how candescent, how hot and treacherous electricity could be when switches are switched and human beings twitch until dead. Well, what poet today hasn't written a pandemic poem? Nan and I each have one. Mine comes out of a food delivery service that my husband and I have. We got it even before the pandemic began, but it's been great during the pandemic. It's called Imperfect Foods, based in San Francisco. Imperfect handles ugly produce that nobody else wants, but that's still very good to eat. During the pandemic, as the wildfires were raging in the West, Imperfect put a note in our delivery that maybe some of the leafy greens would have ash on them from the fires. Imperfect Foods, Inc. and the California wildfires, as seen from the East Coast during a pandemic. In those days, our food arrived on Mondays. Apples with dusky spots, avocados as tiny as huge strawberries, sweet potatoes the size of mere plums. Imperfection can be delicious. One Monday, the company warned us of ash, which proved to me in the East the reality of the wildfires in the West. It overwhelmed me, and I was hard-pressed to rinse the kale, to clean its curly leaves. Tragedies can be curtailed by hosing, I suppose, but never washed away. In wildfires, ash is a house creature tree spirit that reflects flashes of light, TV pictures of excruciating orange and dark silhouettes. While plague was destroying in silence, ash spoke in siren, spoke in helicopter, and I felt the unbearable heat, the kindled sadness for what was happening, for what I couldn't do, an imperfect sorrow reaching across a stricken expanse.
My pandemic poem speaks to the longing for close human contact and the peculiar quality of time during the first year of the pandemic. Early winter 2020. At last, the month consumes the dregs of this confounding year. Earlier tonight, the gibbous moon had risen from the dark behind the shoulder of a hill, skimmed the river sliding toward the sound, and glazed the frozen grasses on its banks. Nearly full, she'd lit a thinning film of cloud. Now halfway high, she pours her luster through the leafless trees to wash against a house across the street. Her silver light uniting with the gold and homely of a family's corner room. I want to stop a while inside the scene, to be a part of both the solitude of moonlight and the warmth of someone reading by a lamp. Each stirs the little thrill of living in a place I do not know. I wish the moment stilled, but it will pass too soon, like every moment wonderful this year. This year, there's something altogether wrong with time. Though it has dawdled between meals, the hours from lunch to dinner barely bearable. It has careened from every Wednesday to the next, and every day without the promise only touch can make of time we'll share ahead. I, for one, cannot afford this race of days. The year expires before I've loved enough.
Phyllis, do you
Wow.
want to take a break?
Yeah. Actually, I'm here now. I was so engrossed that we didn't break after the persona poem.
It's
So,
okay. It's okay.
but I'm actually glad that you read the pandemic ones, particularly, well, both of them. They're just so touching and moving. And then to hear somebody from the East Coast talking about the fires out here with such empathy and closeness to us was really very moving as well. Um, so how about if we just spend a minute talking about the persona poems, and then I think you have more to read after that. Yeah. So
Yep.
I really love the way you've organized your poems and how you're reading them back and forth. And Mary Marcia just says in the chat that it's a very, very touching poems from both of you, the pandemic poems. So and of course, most poets are writing pandemic poems, and those are both so original. So maybe let's just say a few words about the persona. I'm so struck by how it seems as though you know these people, but actually, I'm guessing, I'm not sure, but they're actually made up, or are they people who could have existed? So maybe tell us a little bit about that before you go back to your reading.
Well, my Hannah poems, Hannah Alive, she doesn't exist.
Right. Okay.
But she's a composite of lots of things I have observed about various people, including myself. And it was really fun to create her and to think what she might do or say about a particular subject.
And she lets loose, doesn't she?
Yeah,
She doesn't really hold back. It's such a lovely way to express yourself
it is.
anonymously, and also to be so observant and have a chance to write about that in such a creative way.
I love doing it. I wrote a chapbook called The Last Gun, which
Yeah, tell us about that.
that is in the voice of the last gun on Earth.
Mm.
And all other guns have been rounded up, and they find this holdout. They find him under a mattress, actually, and he's arrested and put into solitary confinement. But everything is in his voice, and he contemplates his life, and then he contemplates how they're going to get rid of him. Just like Hannah contemplated suicide, he contemplates his execution, how they're going to use, and he's hoping it will be the firing squad, because of course there are no guns left in the world, so have trouble using the firing squad.
Yeah, beautiful, so creative. Yeah, and the Hannah poem, having read more of it in your book, it's it's like a little novella, really. And I guess, yeah, and I guess
I turned it into a play. As I was writing that, I
Mhm.
realized it was a monologue. It was a one-woman show, and that's what I
Yeah.
turned it into. Yeah.
Oh, and there's some really memorable moments in there. Yeah. The husband, is it Tony?
Mhm.
We drank ourselves. There's something about drinking that,
Yeah, they like their vodka.
I'm sorry.
They like their vodka.
They like their vodka because you can't smell it, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's what he told her when he was trying to get her to drink.
Yeah.
As kids.
So Nan, do you want to talk about the astronomer's wife? That was so evocative, my goodness. Or other persona poems that
Yeah, that's all I know about her is what I made up. But persona poems are among my favorite to write. And the first book you mentioned, Letter from Italy, 1944, is made up mostly of persona poems in the voice of my father and mother. So I knew them well from letters that my dad had written my mother during the war. But I've also written a persona poem. I started a chapbook of persona poems in the voices of women in nursery rhymes. And then I wrote a persona poem in the voice of Toto from The Wizard of Oz. So there's some I know and some I don't know.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Just endless possibilities. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, the description of the moon that you have in there, the astronomer's wife, and his love affair with the moon, it's just so beautiful. Let me see if I can remember. There was a few lines that I wrote down because I was just so taken by them. Yeah, something luminous and secretive waits in the nighttime sky. He is only here to sleep. The rest he has aloft. Discovery of fold and fissure. That language, mold and mound and dimple. That's just such a beautiful way to describe a planet. Pleasure that belies his diffidence. The moon as morning's concubine. I mean, whoa.
Thank you so much, Phyllis.
Oh, you're welcome. All right. Well, so yeah, we have some comment. I just want to read this. The comment from Bernardo is saying, "I feel like I am sitting before a master's class," and then it is awesome that you two have been weaving back and forth throughout each other's lives. Yeah, and then Bundy also seconds that. Yeah, that it's like sitting in a master class. Yeah. So yeah, let's go back to hearing some more from the masters. Yeah. Not to embarrass you too much.
Right. Well, okay. Well, I think we've both written a Ukraine poem. It's on everyone's mind these days. Mine came about after I read an article in the Financial Times about what the Russians are doing to the Ukrainian farmland and farmers. And this is called Planting Time in Ukraine, March and April 2022. The fibers of the breadbasket are unraveling. Metaphor is of no use in wartime. Call the breadbasket what it is, fertile country that supplies grains near and far, threatened now as arable fields lie unplowed, despoiled by the bear at planting time. Metaphor is useless. The tractor with plow or seeder attached should be chugging out into the fields now and on into the end of April, but won't be. Man and woman on a tractor, easy target for the bear, but that's metaphor too. Call the bear what he is, greedy and cruel creature. And not all bears. This one is a singular carrier of evil who leads his cubs to do his bidding. There's little grain left for the families, for the animals, and none to ship out to Egypt, Indonesia, Morocco, Israel, Spain, Tunisia. Tunisia, once called a breadbasket itself, until it was swallowed up by desert. Now do you see why metaphors don't always work? The world is hungry and hungrier as the bear destroys fecund fields. No seeds will open, no grains will be harvested. The breadbasket, empty, crushed. War destroys metaphor. Food is the only word left.
My war poem is also about Ukraine, but it begins with lines referring to my husband, Gary, who was a rescue pilot in Vietnam, and my father, a regimental surgeon in the 10th Mountain Division during World War II. So it's called Men of War. We watched the news together every night, miles and years apart. I may be horrified, but I can't know, as Gary does, the inside of a war. He understands, as I do not, how wrath of battle waits for those who shelter underground, emerge to stare as daylight draws the curtain up on nothing anymore. He knows how shallow furrows of a field surrender under weight of uniforms that hold the shape of no one anymore. I'll never really know the man he was who bet his life each day in Vietnam. No more my father, running low through hatred still incoming, thinking only how to bear a dying comrade to a place of faintest hope. But I can find my way inside one man the camera searches out in Kyiv. Sorry. The father weeping as he thrusts his child into a narrow fissure in the crowd, a step below the train, praying it will carry her to where the sky is quiet darkness all night long. His wife, who had to choose, hasn't time to turn to him, tell him all she fears and how she loves. She snakes into the crush of refugees, is lost. He sees his daughter, one amid a tight quartet of children pressed against a window pane, not yet frightened, waiting just to know. His wife does not appear. He wants to stay. He has to stay. He is Ukraine. But this feels something like a suicide. This giving up what shaped his life, fed his need to eat, to work, to sleep, and startled in him when he woke to know again that everything was, every day, this woman and this child. The train grinds forward and his daughter starts to understand, then disappears toward the west. He sends with her the part of him that melts, directs the rest to stand inside his country's heart. Thank you.
Well, you know, as we mentioned earlier, in many ways, Nan and I have had parallel lives. Together, we're going to read one of my poems called Parallel Rides. This is, can you all hear the airplane that's going on? This is based on two letters, one that a young girl named Nettie Bacon wrote to her family on April 15th, 1865, shortly after the end of the Civil War, when there was great rejoicing. Nettie was a student at Mount Holyoke College, which was then called Mount Holyoke Seminary, very near Northampton, where Smith is. During her journey in a public carriage from a section of Springfield, Massachusetts called Williamsburg, she learns that President Lincoln has been killed. The other letter that we use in this poem is of 1963, From Me to My Mother, and it reflects a similar journey that I was on when I learned that President Kennedy had been assassinated.
Parallel Rides, Saturday, April 15th, 1865. Dearest friends at home, today has been, I believe, the saddest day this nation ever saw. I've seen many strong men weep like children over the untimely death of our dear president. I was returning from Williamsburg this morning in the hack when we received the startling announcement that the president was assassinated.
Saturday, November 23rd, 1963. Dear Mom, I got a ride with Cheska to New York yesterday afternoon. Stopped in New Haven to pick up Jimmy. At a red light, someone yelled, "The president is dead."
At first, a faint hope that it might be a mistake flitted across our minds.
We thought the guy must mean the president of Yale.
But soon, the painful fact that it was official was made known to us.
Thursday had been such a happy day for me. For you too, I suppose. Didn't you go to symphony? I got an A on a paper, an unusual occurrence, and I was looking forward to the weekend in New York City, happy to catch a ride with Ska and Jimmy.
Friday was a great day of rejoicing here, as I suppose it was with you. Flags were raised, salutes fired, bells rang out merrily, speeches made. Indeed, all were jubilant over the good news about the end of the war so lately received. We were expressing our regrets and lamenting over the sad news in the States when I saw one of the ladies who sat on the back seat laughing and tickling herself over our calamity. I know she was just as glad as she could be that Lincoln was dead. She did not say a word. She knew it was not safe for her. I do believe we should have had a pitched battle if she had opened her mouth.
When we got to New York City, Cheska and Jimmy dropped me off at St. Patrick's. I was beside myself with sorrow. Someone was playing the national anthem on that great organ, and I started crying and decided then and there to go back to Northampton. I overheard someone say that there were people celebrating in Texas. I cried all the way back on the bus, did nothing to hide my tears or my sobs.
When we arrived into Northampton, we found the stores closed and flags hung at half-mast, bells tolling.
Flags at half-mast in Northampton made me cry even more. I went straight to the dorm and collapsed in bed without even changing into my nightgown.
How differently morning was ushered in. Bells tolled long and mournfully. The faces which wore such a hopeful and cheerful look are today flooded with tears.
Tears are all I have today. It's Saturday, and the country has been left without our Kennedy. My heart is broken.
Be good. Be good. Your affectionate Nettie.
I can't wait to get home for Thanksgiving. Anne.
Well, thank you so much. What a rich reading. That's the word that I've come up for your books too. Is
Phyllis, we have one more poem we'd like
riches.
Phyllis, we have one more poem that we'd love to read. It's sort
Oh,
of
good.
you.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that.
We're calling it the coda. And
Okay.
the poem's called Being Had. And we just want to say thank you for this wonderful evening. And this is a persona poem, actually, this one that I'm going to read. It's self-explanatory, maybe a little bit cynical. But before we read it, we just want to say it's been a treat to be here. This is called Being Had. Ever notice that when a TV interview is finished, the host says something like, "Thank you for coming," and the guest says, "Thank you for having me"? For having me? For what? Lunch, dinner, sex? You had me, host? And was it some of the best you've ever had? Come on. I went to graduate school for 5 years on spaghetti. Professors had me as a student. I had them as teachers. I should thank them for having me, I guess. But not for a meal, and not for sex. Well, almost never. Think about this, host. I'm an expert on global warming. You invited me to talk about freak snowstorms and floods, wildfires, desiccation, tornadoes, and tsunamis. I made you look good. I made your producer look good. Those tornadoes I talked about, loss of life and property, death, your viewers loved it and bought the products you advertised. And I'm thanking you. Let's face it. All I needed to say was simply, you're welcome. And host, it wasn't for having had me. But
Phyllis,
we want to thank
thank
you.
you for having us.
Yes, that's what we should be saying to you. Thank you for having us.
Oh, now I get it. Well, a good time was had by all, right? Well, let's open things up, I wonder if people are just filled up the way I am with this beautiful poetry and ideas and thoughts and so many subjects. And I'm just wondering if oh, there's so much coming up on the chat. What a deep double delight, Nan and Anne's poetry. Thanks to both of you. Anne and Nan, that was so unbelievably beautiful, such an unbelievably beautiful read. Thanks for transposing that miniature book that Marty Dickinson and Grace Perkinson found in an antique shop written by the Mount Holyoke student. And my amazing sister, oh, you brought so much to life with your poetry. Thanks to you both. Wow. Well, so does anybody want to speak and say something about the poems or how you felt about the reading or ask a question?
Hi, Phyllis. Hey, this is Steve Arnson. I just wanted
Hey, Steve.
thank the women for the wonderful reading, and especially the alternating back and forth like that. That's always interesting. I like that so much, and I like the last one that they wrote together the best. Thank you very much.
Yeah, what did you like about that one?
Just the narrative. It was well written prose, the story, the history, Lincoln. I had a tour once of the Ford Theater by a guy I met at Burning Man, and it was something. I tell you what, it was just history, and I'll just conclude with that. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. So glad you could be here.
Thank you.
Mm. Anyone else? Well, while you're getting up your courage to speak up. Oh, here, Mary Marcia. Yeah, thanks for raising your hand too.
I want to first say your wonderful poetry tugged at my heartstrings. You just made me feel empathetic with things. Tears came to my eyes and kind of puddled up over Walt Whitman, over the things, the people in the persona poems, and just every poem had a certain tug. And I wanted to ask Nan about her Ukraine poem. Is it written in a form? It sounds like there's repetition in it in a particular way that reminds me of a Festina, but I'm not sure because I can't see it. And it reads so very flowingly, not halting.
Thank you so much for that suspicion. It wasn't a sestina, but I love sestinas as a form, and they're harder to write than it was for me to write this poem. So thank you, though.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Marcia. Yeah, I was noticing how much you use rhyme, it both internal rhyme and at the end of the line in such a creative way. So I wanted to say that to you, Dan. Yeah. Oh, Gary, yeah. Or Gray, sorry.
Hi.
Hi, Greg.
Hi. That was wonderful. Just so heartwarming. Thank you. I have a question, since you both were at Smith together in the mid-60s, I think. Can you say something about how that experience turned you to poetry, or tied you to literature in a way that you've made it the center of your lives?
Go for it, Anne.
Well, Nan was an English major and I wasn't. I majored in Italian, but I read lots and lots of Italian poetry. Of course, I read the Divine Comedy. And so and while I was there, I just started writing poetry. And I think it was just I mean, it doesn't matter what language you're reading in. And English being my first, I was going to write in English.
And as Sister Joy knows, I was raised on poetry. My father was a poet, and the first book he gave me was the Little Golden Treasury of Poems, and they were all had strict rhythm and rhyme. So most of the time I'm not aware of the rhyme, but it's certainly there. And then at Smith, I took a wonderful course with a poet, little known, but very prized, named Sarah Appleton, who encouraged who changed the kind of poetry I was writing as a youngster.
I just wanted to ask, when you were at Juilliard, was it Juilliard together?
No, Smith College.
Smith College, but when you performed at
Carnegie Hall, that was with our octet.
the octet.
Mhm.
Can you say a few words about that experience?
I don't know if I remember it that well. Do you remember that, Nan?
Oh yeah.
I remember one particular thing we didn't do too well, but
You know, I remember that we were perfect, but it was we were an octet. We rehearsed many times a week for 4 years, and there was a competition among colleges to see which groups would go to Carnegie Hall, and our group was one of the 8 groups chosen that showed up there. It was a pretty fine experience. Who had the solo, Anne, that messed it up? Do you remember? It wasn't mine.
it wasn't a solo. It was the song. She sure knew how to use her do-wah, do-do-do-wah. Remember that? and there was something that we did wrong, and maybe nobody else noticed it, but we did.
Oh, that's
Not every poetry reading for you gets song as well.
wow. So I see we have so Bernardo is on the screen. We also have Alfred and Sharon Olson who want to say something. Bernardo, did you have a question or a comment?
First thing I want to do is say hello to my friends, the beautiful ladies.
Hi, Bernardo. It's great to see you. So glad you came.
Where are you, Bernardo? Where are you sitting? In what state?
I'm in Laurel, Maryland.
Okay. Welcome.
So I'm saying, I already put it in the chat. It was a beautiful thing that the way God works to weave you in and out of each other's lives like that. That is fantastic. It reminds me of a quilt. You two need to write a poem from each person's point of view about the effect of the other flowing in and out of your life if you haven't already done that. And now that I found out y'all can sing, I'm gonna be looking for some sing-song poetry from you. You know, and man, you know I'm a lyrical poet, and I got the same thing. The Brothers Grimm and the Mother Goose, and I naturally rhyme. So there it is. But
There it is.
y'all delivered a master class in writing and expressing life through poetry this evening. Thank you so much.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. Thank you, Bernardo. Yeah. So Alfred,
Sure.
thanks for all the hand raising. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an absolute delight. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
It was an absolute delight. Anne, I know. And Nan, it's nice to meet you. And it, particularly in your first half of your sharing, the feeling of empathy was so profound that I felt that came through with the Ukraine and the people who had been abused and the people who were dying and suffering. And there's just so much suffering that you touched in a very, very thoughtful way. And I'm frankly, as profound as that was, and I'll look forward to the recording to hear this all again, but I'm glad we got happy and laughed about the octet at the end too. So it had it all. So you guys, and I thought I agreed with what several people said about the way you work together back and forth was a metaphor for your life and together as Smith graduates.
Yeah. How do you two know each other, if I can ask?
I know that husband of Anne's.
Oh, okay. Good way to know each other. Yeah,
I sometimes go by the name of Fred, and he also goes by the name of Fred.
I see.
Right.
All right.
So I'm West Coast Fred in California, and he's East Coast Fred.
Oh, wait.
And you also go by the handle of Dr. Squash.
Oh, yeah, I saw that in the chat. I
Yeah,
was
he plays squash and is a doctor. So,
Oh, I
so
see. Okay.
squash.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yes, I grabbed that label before any of my other friends did, and it seems to have stuck.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thanks for your comment. Yeah.
Wonderful
Yeah.
evening. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. So Sharon, yeah, you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, I wanted to say this has been a very special reading because I'm a former Palo Alton, so I see friends of mine from Palo Alto here, and
Exactly.
probably I've become very close to Nan and Anne.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Oh,
That's really,
this was really wonderful to be able to share Nan and Anne with my old Palo Alto friends and say, hey, we have
I
great
agree.
moments on the East Coast.
Miss you, Sharon. We miss you.
Oh, hi,
I
Steve.
do. Yeah. Boy, oh boy.
Hi, everybody, from Bill.
There's Bill, my
Bill.
husband.
Bill.
So
I'm
where
coming to
did you move?
Massachusetts in May. I might have to look you up.
Where did you
Yes.
move to? And did you move to Connecticut or
We moved, well, that's what's funny. We moved to Connecticut, and that's where I met Nan mostly. And then we moved to New Jersey, and then we moved just recently to Annapolis. And Anne lives
Oh.
near Annapolis. So, but we knew Anne from the Frost group that Nan organized. So that's really the reason I
yeah.
too.
Oh.
With Gray. See Gray over there?
Yeah.
Very, very wonderful group of poets. Very
Oh, I couldn't
happy
agree
to know.
more. Yeah. Yeah. Well, so here's Sister Joy. Has her hand up.
Yes, good evening.
Hey, Sister Joy.
Hi. So
Oh
good
my,
to meet you.
I just absolutely knew I had to be here for tonight.
Oh,
You ladies are just wonderful. Your poetry is masterful. It's elegant. It's eloquent, and you did not disappoint. I do want to find out: is there going to be a link available for those that may want to share or to view it again?
yes, there will. Yeah.
Okay.
It usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks to get it ready, and then it'll be up on YouTube. And so everybody who registered, we have your email and we'll send you a link to that.
Wonderful.
So,
Wonderful.
yeah, then you can send it out to whoever you want.
Right. Well, congratulations, Nan and Anne.
Thanks for coming,
I
Joy.
very much enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, so I thought maybe, what was it that I had a question actually. So, and then we can see other people might also be thinking of things too. So, but my question had to do with the titles of your books, the two that you read mostly from, the Trouble and the Simple Absence. Yeah. And also how you have the poem set up in the chapters. And if you want to talk about that, I mean, it's always so interesting to me how you figure out how you want to put your book together, the title being such an important part of it, and how that came about for you. I find that to be interesting to hear people talk about that. So,
Well, I was working on my book with my publisher, Rennie McClook and Antrim House, and we were reading a poem that occurs somewhere in the middle of the book, and one of the lines had the words simple absence in them. And coincidentally, we looked up at each other and said, that would be a good title. So that's the beginning and end of that story.
Wow. It is a wonderful title. And I kind of was wondering what it meant to you. Like sometimes we could have all our different thoughts about it. It's really fascinating to ask the author how that worked for you as a title.
It was in a poem in which I was recounting a dream in which the moon was falling, and the moon was standing for my father, his death.
Mm-hmm.
And the moon falling is more than simple absence in the sky.
All right.
That's the meaning of that for me.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
It's the name of that poem too, isn't it? Simple Absence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It just conjures up so many images, if you take it out of the context of that poem and think about it more generally too.
Yes, I think it could have a different meaning for everybody in this room.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And then we have your title, which is probably going to mean the same thing to all of us. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and that came about, there's
what a
no
wonderful
poem.
title. Yeah. Uh-huh.
There's no poem named Trouble in it. But very often the title of a book is the name of one of the poems. But Trouble, I just thought all these poems that I'm putting together have to do with some kind of trouble, one kind or another of trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's how it happened.
And that, I really bonded to both of you and your writing, just in terms of, that's something I feel so important also to write about troubling things.
Mm-hmm.
And
Phyllis,
do that so much too. Yeah.
could I take this opportunity to read something I wrote in response to your book, which I've
Yeah,
read?
that'd be great. Yeah.
Speaking of trouble, it's the right.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm going to read it. That book.
Yeah.
It takes no prisoners, Phyllis, delivers haymakers, and is always graceful too, full of beautiful writing, exact and surprising images. I feel as if most of them do what you say you didn't mean to do in waiting for the bombs to drop. You open doors into dark places where you and others live, past or present, and show yourself strong every time, it seems to me, though not without wounds.
Mm.
It's a
Oh,
remarkable book.
well, thank you so much. It's such a beautiful. When I got that, I just thought, wow, it's really a gift. Yeah.
Well, so is the book.
It's really a gift. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, anyone else want to comment or ask a question? I see some people that need to leave, and that's just fine.
Goodbye, Michael. It's good to have you there.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Yeah. So, any other comments or questions or thoughts or?
I wanted to say, Phyllis, that I really enjoyed your refugee piece that you
Oh,
opened
thank you.
everything with. And I had the impression somehow it was Libya. I don't know. This is something that you wrote some time ago on.
Yes.
And I had written about that same shore and about the Exodus as well. It just sort of resonates with me. That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Steve, because I was trying to remember, because as I decided to read that poem, I was trying to remember which refugee crisis it was about, and I couldn't, which is very sad to me, because we've had so many. But it could have been that one. I'm maybe it'll come to me. You know how sometimes when you don't need the information anymore, then there it is. So
Yeah, well,
but that feeling of I remember it was something where people were escaping by boat, and they were, they had come up to the ocean, and then, the boats were full and there was nowhere to go, and they were, some of them were just jumping in. So, yeah, it's just, we have to write about it, right? It's too much to bear. So we have to write about it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So I see Stephen.
Oh, yes. Good evening from West Virginia.
Oh,
Thank
hi.
you to Anne and Nan for a very elegant and, for me, very emotional evening. I wanted to ask you about the topical work that you read tonight about the war in Ukraine. I have found myself talking about it using the phrase unspeakable horrors. And you're the first two that I feel have really put some words to what we're seeing that have really resonated beyond what we see in the headlines. But I'm curious to know from both of you what you felt when you were writing about such unspeakable horrors. In other words, were you crying when you wrote the poems, or did it evoke, I don't know, any kind of strong, like outward emotional quality that others might see while you were writing?
I wasn't crying, but I do feel a lot of anger about what's going on in Ukraine. And so when I read that article in the Financial Times about the what they're doing to the farmers, I mean, we are hearing about the cities. I mean, that's enough in itself. But then I read about the farmers, and so they're not going to be able to plant their crops, and there will be more starvation than there's going to be anyway. And they can't feed, and they used to make a lot of money for that country by shipping a lot of their grains out to all these different countries, and now they won't be able to do that. So it was just that emotion that made me write that. By the way, that poem that I read, Planting Time in Ukraine, was featured on something called New Verse News. I don't know if you, and some people get it every day, and
Yeah.
that's where you find it, newversenews.org.
Yeah, it's a great place to have landed it. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want, and if you have the link, you can put it in the chat. Yeah. So people can go and look at it. Yeah. And if anybody is writing political poetry, it's a great place to submit to. Yeah. They take it right away. The editor is wonderful.
Yeah, he's very nice.
So Nan, do you want to talk about your poem? Both of those poems were so strong. So evocative and emotional.
Well, I knew as I wrote at the beginning of that poem that I couldn't write about the inside of the war, but I did see on a newscast the picture of that man. I cried then. I think I didn't cry as I wrote the poem, but I tell you, the day that goes by when I don't cry, I don't remember the last day. And part of it, of course, is fury, but it's also an ache I can't get rid of.
Yeah, well, that's so writing about it is something we can do with our feelings about it. And I'm very glad that Stephen asked that question, because I think it's so important for us to talk about it. And it's so surreal to me. You wake up every morning, and here we are in California. We're in a drought. It's sunny every day, which sounds wonderful, but it might rain tomorrow. But and it's like the sun is shining, the air is clean right now, and there's this war going on, and it's almost, we're so disconnected from it. We read about it, we can watch it. I can't bear to do that, but so to hear these things and to remind ourselves, I think, is really, really important. How lucky we are that we're okay, and not everybody is okay here, right in the US of A. So we want to be reminded and be aware of that. Take it into account. Well, I'm going to close us up with a poem now, and then we'll stop the recording. And if anybody wants to stay a little bit later, you're welcome to. So,
I just want to thank Stephen.
Oh.
I forgot to thank him. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah. So, and I was thinking about what to read as a closing. So this is a poem of mine that I also was really angry when I wrote this. And I think that probably will come through. It's called Don't Read This Poem. And the last line, to me, has a lot of resonance for us. It has for years, and we really need to start doing something about it. Don't read this poem. Don't get me started on the news from Iraq, from Syria, from our public schools. It streams onto my phone, those bodies in the streets, the snare of an automatic, cloud of chlorine over a city, caged face of a child watching a gun. My country triggers its Death Stars into another gash in the world for no good reason, gets this thing going, the way revenge makes evil the winner, the way crazy people can buy guns as easily as corn chips. Don't get me started on the way we are afraid and too busy, how the homeless mold in the street or at the borders while we walk by their realm of suffering like another kind of Death Star. Don't read this poem because it's too hopeless. Look for love somewhere in the rubble of human behavior. Don't let yourself be afraid, even though you feel fear as the only choice, even though most people know right from wrong, even though war is a beast beckoning from a dark place. Get out to the ocean, bring an extra sandwich, learn about the jungle, sing homage to John Lennon, practice laughing yoga, don't fall asleep at the wheel, don't drive around with a body bag in your trunk, get the oil changed. Thank you. And thank you so much, Anne and Nan and everyone. Thank you so much for coming. And hopefully we'll see you next time. We're going to have two really amazing readers again, another two really amazing readers, Paul Hostovsky and George Bilger. So should be really good as well. And if you want to be on my mailing list, just let me know and I'll send out an email with the YouTube link.
Thank you, Anne and Nan and Phyllis.